Good morning. On the island of Tasmania, the worst massacre in Australian history is finally over. At least 34 people were killed and 4 others critically wounded when a 29-year-old gunman with a history of mental problems opened fire in a popular tourist area. The carnage came to an end only this morning after the gunman caught fire following a 12-hour standoff with police. He's alive and in custody today, Monday, April the 29th, 1996.
From NBC News, this is Today with Bryant Gumbel and Katie Couric, live from Studio 1A in Rockefeller Plaza.
And good morning. Welcome to Today on this Monday morning. It seems only a month goes by these days before we have to report on a massacre of this sort. We had Scotland last month, and now this one coming from Australia. This one's terrible.
Really terrible. It must have been so frightening for all those tourists who were gathered, because apparently he came up with a surfboard and just started chatting with them, and then boom. Right,
he just opened fire and methodically just walked around gunning them down, then took some others hostage. We're going to move to the news desk in just a little bit. News desk. Good morning, start with Matt Lauer. Matt, good morning.
Brian and Katie, good morning to you. Good morning, everyone. In Australia, after a day of terror and death, a grim investigation continues today. A 29-year-old man is in custody, blamed for the deaths of nearly 36 people. It happened on the island of Tasmania. That's off the southern coast of Australia. The backdrop was the resort community of Port Arthur. Details now from Rod Stephen of Australia's Channel 7.
The ruins of this guest house are all that remain of the gunman's final act of violence. He allegedly lit the blaze that engulfed his 3 hostages before he surrendered to police. Suffering from severe burns, he was taken by ambulance to Hobart Hospital. The 29-year-old man walked into one of Australia's earliest settlements on Sunday and began firing indiscriminately at dozens of men, women and children.
There's the gunshots, live action here at Port Arthur.
Are there police here?
Apparently there are police here.
Check the phone with us.
Karen Jones and Philip Wilburn survived to tell their story.
Could you hear the gunfire?
Mm-hmm. It was just like a cannon going off. We thought it was all part of the show.
The massacre at a major tourist attraction has shocked the nation. It had been a killing spree unparalleled in modern Australian history. Prime Minister John Howard has expressed his condolences to the relatives of the victims. The gunman remains in Hobart Hospital, where many of his victims are being treated. Rod Stephen for NBC News, Sydney, Australia.
Thanks, Brian. The worst massacre in Australian history ended this morning with more than 30 dead. Anne Fullwood is the late-night news host for Australia's Channel 7. She joins us now from Sydney. Miss Fullwood, thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Katie.
I imagine that the country is in a state of shock right now. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think anywhere in the world with an event like this happening would be in a state of shock, and more especially Tasmania is a very small state of Australia. You probably know there are about 7 or 8 states in Australia, and Tasmania is a very quiet and peaceful community where tourists were going to Port Arthur, the scene of this massacre, and the nation's shocked by the fact that this has just happened in such a sleepy, quiet hollow. You know, you think of these massacres as... Yes, sorry.
I was just going to say, tell us a little more about Port Arthur, where this actually took place. It's described as an international tourist destination, but many Australians go there as well?
Yes, indeed, and in fact most of the people who were slaughtered at this scene were Australians. It is, as you can see on the map there, Port Arthur is a convict settlement. The irony of this is that this was about 150 years ago, a penal colony. Australia was settled as a convict settlement, you might remember in your history, but this Port Arthur convict settlement was about the worst, and the worst criminals were shipped from England to Port Arthur, the penal colony. So it has this history about it anyway, and now this has happened. So people go to reflect on what was a terrible and traumatic history, and now this.
Really ironic. Tell us what you know about this 29-year-old man.
Well, a loner. These things one can never rationalise. He has lived in the suburbs of Hobart, which is the capital of the state of Tasmania, not far. It's about 100 kilometres from Port Arthur. Lived alone. A painter, a guy who's a witness or who knew this man, talked on a couple of news stories that we had earlier today about how this fellow was a very unusual character. This man did some painting work at his house and said he mumbled things and felt very at risk and so on. And other people, friends of his, said that over the years He's been a loner, and they felt that they had to look after him. He's also intellectually disabled.
All right.
So there's more news to come out on it, Katie.
Ann Fullwood in Sydney. Ann, thank you very, very much. Coming up on 7:15 now, here's Brian.
All right. 26 past the hour. We were talking about Katie's guest earlier from Australia. And I was interested in one thing when she was talking about what this guy was and who had said what about him. Because I was reading the article this morning. I was surprised to learn, good law actually, that under Australia's very strict laws, the media is not allowed to report anything about his background until the trial is underway. So I was surprised to hear her sitting there talking about he used to be this, and one person said this about him, etc.
Maybe because it's to the States and not being broadcast in Australia.
I don't know. It's interesting.
I
think it's a great law.
Rules about taking photos of people too, I think.
Yeah, we're seen in Australia.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we're on Channel 7.
You're right.
Early in the morning. I was just curious whether or not that didn't.
So you're wondering if she's going to get in trouble?
Well, no. I mean, I don't know how the law is enforced or what applies and what doesn't. I mean, she must know the guidelines.
Yeah.
And yet she seemed to have no problem saying what she did to you. And yet what I read is pretty clear. I mean, it said under Australia's strict guidelines, the media may not report any information about his background until his trial is underway.
You know, there are a lot of countries with stricter laws in the United States. For example,
Canada's got them too.
It's got a very strict law about that. And remember when there was some murder trial that they had to black out the stations in New York that could be received by Canadians? And
yeah,
like in Buffalo.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I was just surprised to hear her doing that. I didn't think she could.
Supposedly it was just an incredibly grisly scene. I mean, you know, a lot of children and with their, it's terrible.
Yeah, not good. And the toll may rise too, because there were 4 critically injured.
One person who's missing
in
that
one person
cottage.
Still missing, right? Presumed dead.
Yeah, there were 3 hostages in the cottage when he set it on fire, and they found 2 bodies. So.
Man.